cars and street vendors calling out prices, when Nabila Mensa felt her phone vibrate in her hand. She almost ignored it. Almost. When she looked down and saw her brother Kwame's name, her chest tightened the way it always did. Kwame was the golden child, the one everyone praised, the one whose mistakes were forgiven before they were even made. Nabila was just there. Quiet one. The forgotten one. The message was short. An engagement invitation. Venue. No warmth. No, I hope you can come. Just information, like she was an afterthought. Nabila sat on the edge of her small bed, staring at the screen, memories rushing back, being talked over at family gatherings, being compared, being told to be more like your brother. She had learned early how to stay silent and shrink herself to survive. Her first instinct was to say no. She imagined the stares, the whispers, the polite smiles that never reached the eyes. She imagined standing alone while everyone gathered around Kwame and his fiancée. The old anxiety crept in, heavy and familiar. For a moment, she even typed an excuse about being busy. But then she stopped. Something in her shifted. Not anger. Not pride. Just calm. She realized she didn't owe anyone a performance. She didn't need to prove anything. Attending didn't mean begging for acceptance. Could simply mean showing up for herself. So she deleted the excuse and replied with one word. Okay. Nabila placed her phone face down and took a deep breath. She would attend quietly. No expectations. No explanations. Just her presence. Whatever happened next, she told herself, she would walk in with her head held high and leave the same way. The engagement hall in Kumasi looked nothing like the places Nabila was used to. Tall glass doors reflected the evening lights, and uniformed attendants stood at the entrance, greeting guests with wide smiles. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung low, throwing warm light over polished floors and gold-trimmed chairs. People kept saying the name of the business group that owned the hall, like it meant instant respect. Nabila paused for a second before walking in, smoothing her simple dress and adjusting her flat shoes. She already felt out of place. As soon as she stepped inside, heads turned. Not because she was late, not because she was loud, but because she wasn't dressed the way they expected. Her cousins leaned toward each other, whispering behind carefully covered mouths. She caught words like still simple, and she didn't even try. An aunt looked her up and down, then gave a tight smile that felt more like pity than kindness. Nabila smiled back, the way she had practiced for years, calm and polite, as if none of it touched her. She searched the room for a familiar face, hoping someone might wave her over or save her a seat. Every table was almost full. People shifted their bags, turned their shoulders, pretended not to see her. Near the front, there were empty chairs, but they were quickly claimed by relatives who arrived after her. No one spoke up. No one said, "Sit here, Nabila." It was clear where she ranked. Eventually, she found a chair near the side, slightly behind a tall flower arrangement that blocked part of the stage. Not a bad seat, just not an important one. As she sat down, she let out a slow breath and folded her hands in her lap. She reminded herself she hadn't come to be noticed. She had come to show up. Around her, conversations flowed easily. People laughed loudly, bragged softly, and dropped names like they were currency. Several family members talked proudly about working in the same complex, about how lucky they were to be connected to big people. Nabila listened without interrupting, her eyes moving slowly around the hall. She noticed the details others ignored, the way the staff moved with quiet discipline, the polished surfaces, the calm control behind all the luxury. While others competed for attention, Nabila stayed still. She smiled when someone glanced her way. She nodded when spoken to. Inside there was a familiar ache, but also something new, clarity. They saw her as the less important one, and for the first time she let them. The music softened, and the host called for attention as the speeches began. Glasses were raised, cameras came out, and the room leaned forward, ready for jokes and praise. Nabila sat quietly in her seat, hands folded, eyes calm. She already felt the tension in her chest, like she knew something was coming but couldn't stop it. One of her aunts took the microphone first. She smiled wide, enjoying the attention, and spoke about family, blessings, and how proud everyone was of Kwame. Then her eyes landed on Navila. The smile changed. And of course, she laughed, we are all still waiting for Navila to surprise us one day. You know, some people take longer to succeed. Few people chuckled. The aunt waved her hand like it was harmless fun. But don't worry, dear. Everyone has their own pace. Laughter rippled through the hall. Navila felt the heat rise to her face. But she didn't move. She kept her posture straight, her expression soft. Years ago, this would have crushed her. Tonight, she simply breathed. Kwame took the microphone next. Instead of correcting the moment, he laughed along. "Ah, Auntie, you've always been honest," he said, shaking his head like it was all love. He didn't look at Navila. He went on to talk about hard work and ambition, about building a future with focus. Every word felt like a quiet comparison. The room nodded, approving. Then Esi Boateng stepped forward, elegant and confident, her ring catching the light. She smiled sweetly before speaking. "I think success looks different to everyone," she said, pausing just long enough. "Some of us have real careers, with responsibility and pressure. Others," she shrugged lightly, "well, everyone contributes in their own way." The room laughed again, louder this time. Navila heard the laughter clearly, every sharp sound of it. She felt eyes flick toward her, then away. No one defended her. No one shifted uncomfortably. It was easy for them. She was the safe joke. She smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. Inside, something hurt, deep and familiar. But there was also control. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her head. She didn't rush out. She stayed seated, calm to the point of pain, letting the moment pass over her like a wave. They thought her silence meant weakness. They didn't know it was strength holding everything together. As the laughter faded and the speeches moved on, Navila's mind drifted somewhere else. Not to the stage. Not to the smiling faces. Back to the life no one in that room had ever bothered to ask about. They thought they knew her story because they had never heard it. But silence doesn't mean emptiness. She remembered the night she left home. No big fight. No dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet decision made after years of being told, directly and indirectly, that she mattered less. She packed a small bag, stepped out into the early morning air of Kumasi, and promised herself she would stop waiting for approval that was never coming. She was still young, still scared, but she was tired of shrinking. Life didn't soften for her. She worked wherever she could. Early mornings at a small shop, long afternoons assisting at an office, late nights cleaning spaces that people only noticed when they were dirty. Some days she ate once. Some nights she cried quietly so no one would hear. She learned how to keep going even when no one clapped for her effort. Especially then. While others posted celebrations, Navila studied. She enrolled in finance courses most people didn't even know existed. She learned numbers the way others learned survival. After work, she sat alone with books and borrowed laptops, teaching herself how money moved, how businesses grew, how systems were built and protected. No family member ever asked what she was studying. No one checked her progress. It was just her and the work. Slowly, something began to change. She saved carefully. She invested carefully. She made mistakes quietly and fixed them the same way. She sat in meetings where people underestimated her, and she let them. She listened more than she spoke. She signed documents no one would ever imagine her name on. She built something solid, not flashy, not loud, something that didn't need applause to exist. Back in the hall, the lights glowed and the music played, but Navila stayed still. The people laughing around her had seen only the surface. They never asked how she survived. They never asked what she learned. They never asked what she owned. And that was the irony. The life they mocked was the very life that had taught her patience, discipline, and power. She didn't rise by being seen. She rose by being ignored. The engagement continued as if nothing had happened. Music returned, food was served, and the room slowly filled with loud conversations again. Outside the main hall, the rest of the complex buzzed with life. Offices on the upper floors still had lights on. Restaurants nearby were packed with weekend customers. Shops stayed open late, counting on events like this to bring in more money. The entire place felt alive, like a small city that never truly slept. Navila noticed how often her family mentioned the building. One cousin bragged about working in an office upstairs, calling it a big deal location. An uncle laughed proudly about how his company had finally secured space there, saying it meant stability and status. Another relative talked about the restaurant he managed just across the courtyard, praising the management for always doing things right. Their voices were full of pride, like being connected to this place gave them value. They spoke freely, confidently. None of them lowered their voices around Navila. To them, she wasn't important enough to matter in these conversations. Navila listened, her face calm, her eyes steady. She knew every corner of the complex they were praising. She knew which businesses paid rent late and which ones never missed a deadline. She knew which floors made the most profit and which tenants would soon expand. She knew how carefully everything was maintained, how systems ran quietly in the background so people could work, eat, and celebrate without worry. This place wasn't just a venue to her. It was structure. It was planning. It was years of discipline turned into something real. As family members laughed and boasted, they never once wondered who owned the walls around them. They never asked who signed the contracts or approved the renovations. They assumed ownership belonged to some distant group of powerful men they would never meet. That thought made it easier to speak freely, to feel small but safe. Navila took a slow sip of water and glanced around the room. The irony sat heavy in her chest. The same people who mocked her silence depended on this place for their jobs, their income, their pride. Every salary they earned here, every meal they served, every office they worked in existed because someone had built and protected this space. And that someone sat quietly among them, overlooked and underestimated. She didn't correct them. She didn't interrupt their stories. She let them talk, let them feel important, let them believe what they wanted. There was a strange peace in knowing the truth alone. For years, she had learned how power could exist without noise. Tonight, she was surrounded by proof. They thought success was loud. Navila knew it could be silent and still hold everything together. The night moved on smoothly, like it was planned down to the last detail. Music played softly in the background, waiters moved between tables, and laughter rose and fell in waves. Navila sat quietly, watching it all, when she noticed a familiar face at the edge of the room. The hall manager had just entered, scanning the guests carefully, his expression serious but calm. When his eyes landed on her, he didn't hesitate. He walked past laughing relatives, past important-looking guests, straight toward Navila. People barely noticed at first. But when he stopped in front of her and bent slightly, the movement caught attention. "Good evening, Madame Mensa," he said clearly with respect. The words cut through the noise like a sharp bell. Navila looked up, calm as ever. "Good evening," she replied softly. The manager held out a slim folder with both hands. "I apologize for disturbing you during the event," he continued, his voice professional. "These documents need your signature tonight. The catering extension and the lease adjustment you approved earlier." A few conversations nearby slowed. Someone paused mid-laugh. A chair scraped softly against the floor as someone turned around. Navila took the folder, flipped through the pages without rushing. Her fingers moved confidently, familiar with the papers. She picked up the pen, signed where the tabs were marked, then handed it back. "Thank you," she said simply. The manager smiled, relieved. "As always, madam. Everything is running smoothly." He gave a small nod and stepped away. Silence followed him. Didn't happen all at once. It spread slowly, like people realizing the music had stopped even though it hadn't. Heads turned. Whispers froze in mouths. Eyes moved from the manager's retreating figure back to Navila, who sat exactly the same way she had all evening. Someone murmured, "Did he just call her Madame Mensa?" Kwame frowned, confused. His fiancée's smile faltered. The aunt who had joked earlier stared openly now, trying to connect dots she never imagined existed. Navila felt the shift in the room but didn't react. Her heart beat steady. This wasn't a reveal she planned. It was just business, arriving on time like it always did. For years, People had mistaken her quietness for emptiness. In that moment, the truth pressed gently but firmly against the room. The laughter didn't return. The confidence drained from voices. And without a single speech or announcement, the balance of power changed. Navila sat there, calm and unshaken, as the silence spoke for her. First, no one said anything. The silence sat heavy, uncomfortable, stretching longer than it should have. People glanced at each other, then back at Navila, like they were waiting for someone else to explain what they had just seen. A few nervous laughs tried to escape, but they died quickly, falling flat in the air. Then it started to click. Someone whispered almost too quietly, "Madam Mensa." Mensa. Another person leaned closer, piecing it together. The documents. The manager's tone. The way he had walked straight past everyone else. Understanding moved across the room like a slow wave, touching one face at a time. Eyes widened. Mouths tightened. Kwame's smile faded completely. He looked around the hall, then back at Navila. His brow creased with confusion and disbelief. Sai's confident posture stiffened. Her fingers tightened around her clutch as her eyes darted toward the walls. The ceiling, the space around them. The same space they had been praising moments ago. The ant who had laughed the loudest earlier swallowed hard. Her face drained of color as realization settled in. This wasn't just a venue. This wasn't just a hall owned by some distant group. This place belonged to Navila. The offices upstairs. The shops outside. The restaurants their relatives managed. The paychecks they depended on. All of it traced back to the woman they had mocked. The laughter disappeared completely. Conversations stopped. Bragging turned into silence. Pride collapsed into something quieter and heavier. Shame. People avoided eye contact, suddenly interested in their phones, their plates, the floor. A cousin shifted uncomfortably, remembering every careless word spoken earlier. An uncle cleared his throat, his confidence nowhere to be found. Navila sat still, her face calm, her hands resting gently in her lap. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She let them sit with the truth, the same way she had sat with their jokes. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were listening. Power had changed hands without a sound, not through shouting or anger, but through simple fact. They had underestimated her because it was easy, because she was quiet, because she didn't announce her wins. Now that same quiet had become unbearable to sit across from. For the first time that night, Navila was fully seen. And for many in that room, being seen that way hurt far more than any insult ever could. The silence didn't last long. Couldn't. Too many people were uncomfortable, and discomfort always demands noise. Kwame was the first to break. He cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like laughter at all. "Navila. I mean," he stammered, stepping closer to her table. "I didn't know. You never said anything." His words tripped over each other, rushed and unsteady, like an apology he hadn't practiced. Navila looked up at him calmly. She didn't nod. She didn't interrupt. She simply listened. The ant followed quickly, panic hiding behind a sudden smile. "Ah, Navila, you've always been hard-working," she said loudly, as if volume could rewrite the past. "I used to tell everyone you were very smart, very focused." Her hands fluttered as she spoke, searching for agreement in the room. No one responded. The praise felt heavy and awkward, landing where the jokes had been moments before. Sai stood nearby, her earlier confidence completely gone. She avoided Navila's eyes, adjusting her ring again and again. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, uncertain. "We didn't realize." "I mean, it's impressive," she said, the words sounding forced. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. The sarcasm from earlier had vanished, replaced by careful politeness. Around them, relatives nodded too quickly, smiled too wide, spoke too kindly. Compliments were offered like emergency exits. Everyone seemed eager to fix what had already been said, to erase the laughter that now felt cruel. Navila remained seated. She didn't stand up to accept their words. She didn't reassure them. She didn't say, "It's okay." Her silence wasn't cold, it was honest. For years, she had explained herself to people who never listened. Tonight she chose something different. She met Kwame's eyes briefly, then looked away. That small movement said more than any speech. It reminded him that knowing her success didn't mean knowing her journey. That praise after humiliation doesn't heal the wound, it only exposes it. The room felt tense, like everyone was waiting for her reaction. But Nabila gave them none. No anger, no pride, just quiet presence. In that moment, her silence carried weight. It held the memory of every overlooked effort, every ignored struggle, every joke she had swallowed. They had expected celebration or forgiveness. What they received instead was dignity. And somehow that was harder for them to face. After the awkward apologies faded into uneasy smiles, Nabila slowly stood from her seat. The movement caught attention again, but this time no one laughed, no one whispered. The room waited. She smoothed her dress, the same simple dress that had been judged earlier, and took a step toward her brother and his fiancé. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and steady. "Congratulations," she said to Kwame, then to ESI. No bitterness, no hidden message, just two simple words spoken with grace. She wished them well, not because they deserved it in that moment, but because she refused to let their behavior change who she was becoming. Kwame opened his mouth as if to say more, but she gently lifted a hand, not in anger, just to signal that this was enough. She didn't want explanations. She didn't want apologies wrapped in panic. Tonight wasn't about clearing the air. It was about closing a chapter. Nabila turned and walked toward the exit. Each step felt lighter than the last. People made space for her now. The same relatives who couldn't save her a seat earlier moved chairs aside, offered forced smiles, nodded respectfully. Some whispered her name with a different tone, careful, almost afraid. She acknowledged no one. She didn't need to. Near the entrance, a member of the event team hurried after her. "Madam, would you like a car arranged?" he asked quietly. She thanked him and declined. Outside, a few guests from other events in the complex had noticed the shift and were watching with curiosity. Someone lifted a phone, ready to record. Another asked softly, "Is that her?" Nabila shook her head once. "No interviews," she said, kind but firm. She had spent years building quietly. She wasn't about to turn her pain into entertainment. The night air was cooler when she stepped outside. The lights of the complex glowed behind her, bright and proud, but she didn't look back. Revenge would have been easy. Speech, sharp smile, public correction. But dignity had always cost her more, and given her more in return. As she walked away, she thought about the younger version of herself who had once packed a small bag and left home without applause. That girl had survived on hope and discipline. Tonight was for her. Nabila didn't need to stay and watch people rewrite their opinions. She didn't need to enjoy their discomfort. Her power wasn't in embarrassing them. It was in knowing she could leave with her head high and her heart intact. She got into her car and closed the door gently. The noise of the celebration faded behind her. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Not a victory. Peace. Later that night, alone with her thoughts, Nabila replayed everything in her mind, not with anger, but with understanding. The whispers, laughter, the jokes that were meant to place her beneath everyone else. They hadn't mocked her because she failed. They mocked her because they couldn't imagine her success looking the way it did. Quiet, patient, unannounced. For a long time, she had wondered if staying silent meant she was invisible. That night taught her something different. Silence had protected her. While others were busy performing, she was building. While they chased approval, she learned discipline. She didn't grow by being celebrated. She grew by being underestimated. She realized she never wanted applause from people who only clapped when power stood in front of them. Applause fades. Opinions change. But patience builds things that last. Every late night, every ignored effort, every moment she chose peace over reaction had shaped the life she now stood in. What hurt most wasn't the laughter. It was how easy it had been for them to dismiss her. And yet, that dismissal gave her freedom. No pressure. No expectations. No one watching closely enough to interfere. They never saw her coming, and that was the point. Navila understood then that success doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it walks into rooms where it was once belittled and sits quietly until the truth reveals itself on its own. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She had proof. And more importantly, she had peace. That night didn't change who she was. Confirmed it. She would continue to move quietly, choose dignity, and let results speak where words never could. They laughed because they thought she was nothing. They went silent when they realized she owned everything that fed